All right, so no data analysis. This is going to be maybe a change of pace. It's about if somebody gives you a dynamic model of birds moving around or some species moving around. Statisticians, biologists form these models. How can you use such a model to make decisions? This is work with Dan Sheldon from UMass and my student Shan Shu. So we're going to be talking about a problem called conservation planning. And you can, an example would be this red cockaded woodpecker, which is an endangered species. People want to try to protect this bird. And to do that, they purchase land and conserve that land for the bird to spread, and the population will hopefully flourish. And the question is, how should you purchase the land? What parcels you should buy, and when you should buy them. And there are other species that fall into this class of problems as well. Now, just to say a little bit more about the problem, we're going to be using red to indicate the presence of a species. And the land, usually there's an area of interest. This is, I think, 150 acres or so. The land is partitioned into what are called parcels, and we know the costs of the parcels, and these are available to be purchased if we want to purchase them, and we can afford it. And there are some free parcels, which are great. They're already owned by a government agency, and they can be conserved if we'd like to. And they're nice because if we could get birds there, we sort of get population spread for free, in a sense. Now, how do we, what are our actions in this planning problem? Well, the actions are basically to purchase and conserve a land parcel, and I'm showing that by green here. And really, it's a set of parcels. We can do this as long as we have the money at a particular time to do this. And after we purchase parcels, the bird population, in this case, or whatever species we're dealing with, will diffuse or spread to some of the purchased parcels. And of course, they may spread to other parts of the map, but we're really only going to count the ones that spread to the conserved areas, because those are sort of conserved for good, and those habitats are stable. They're not going to be bought by somebody else and destroyed. And those are really the only ones that are going to be monitored for counts anyway, in large part. So we have purchasing and then diffusion. Now, there have been a variety of, there have been variants of this problem that people have looked at in prior work. I'm going to show you sort of two extremes. The first was by Dan Sheldon. I think he sort of brought this problem to the AI community. And he studied the problem that I'm going to refer to as upfront planning, which is I give you a big sum of money, millions of dollars, and I want you to purchase all the land right now upfront. I'll tell you where the birds are right now, but I want you to purchase all the land. You see here in the green, this might be a purchase, a very expensive purchase. And I want you to do that in a way that will optimize the spread of the population and optimize the population after 100 years or 50 years, 20 years. And so we might watch that spread, and we might get something like this, right? So we see that this was a pretty nice purchase because the free areas over here ended up being populated, and so it paid off. Now the problem with this, of course, is it's sort of like open loop planning, right? You're making all the decisions up front before you ever see the dynamics unfold, and obviously you could imagine you're not going to do any worse if you were to watch the population spread, and then make your purchases contingent on what you observe in later years. So if the population is not doing so well in this part of the map, maybe we don't want to put resources over there. We want to put them someplace else. So the other extreme would be what you might call fully adaptive planning or closed loop planning. And this was an HCI paper a couple of years ago. And here we can incrementally purchase the parcels year by year or whatever your decision epoch is. And you can make those purchases contingent on what you see about the population. So here we see that we own some land, we see the current population, we decide to buy a few parcels. We've got some budget, our budget's coming in every year. We see the population spread, we buy a few more, and so on and so forth. Now, the issue with the approach that was presented in that paper is that it was myopic in the sense that when you are purchasing a parcel or a set of parcels now, it did not think about your potential purchases in the future. So it does think about the population spread in the future based on what I'm going to purchase, but it does not think about how what I'm doing in the future potentially should impact what I do right now. So it's myopic in that sense. They showed that despite that, under some assumptions, that things are submodular and that you can get some approximation results for this problem. The issue is, the assumption that had to be made is that there's no population spread between parcels, which, for birds or a mobile species is kind of a really bad assumption. It's sort of the opposite of what we're hoping for. We're trying to spread between parcels. Now it's not such a crazy assumption there are domains, for example, insects, where if the parcels are large enough, this assumption holds. And so that's really what their work was motivated by. But the theoretical results don't really hold in our situation. And so there's a question of whether being a little less myopic could result in better plans, better planning. And that's what we set out to do in this paper. So we've got these two extremes. There's no prior method that is both fully adaptive and non-myopic. And we're going to talk about a method that is fully adaptive, non-myopic, but full disclosure, we're going to lack any approximation guarantees. It's going to be an empirical evaluation. It's a hard problem. So just to give you the problem setup to make sure everything's clear. So every delta years, that's going to be our decision epoch. Maybe 5 years, that's a reasonable number. We're going to observe the current budget that we've accumulated and the current population, and we're going to be asked to suggest a set of parcels to purchase. So that's what happens every decision epoch. And we're going to try to maximize the population after some horizon number of years. And the knowledge we're assuming, and this is where the modeling would come in, the knowledge we're assuming is a distribution over future budgets, because there's quite a bit of variance in where the money comes from. You get donors, you have grants. We all know how variable that can be, and we also have a stochastic population spread model. So this basically tells you how likely is it if a bird or a species is in this location, are they going to spread to this other location? So what's the probability of that happening? And biologists have models for describing this. Basically, it's less probable to spread to more distant parcels. So we have those two pieces of information, and we want to somehow make the decisions of what to purchase now. So there's no sort of specialized method for this problem, as I've said. We could talk about trying to use domain-independent planners from AI or operations research. The issue that arises, if anybody knows a planner that can handle these, I'd be more than happy to hear about it. The issue that arises here is there's a large action branching factor, and there's a large stochastic branching factor. So this is just a cartoon version. At our current state, basically the number of actions are the number of subsets of parcels we could buy within our budget. And in the problem that I showed you, that map, there were 2,500 parcels. Even if you only consider pairs, that's 2,500 squared. That's a lot of actions. It's going to basically foil most search-based planners. There's also a lot of stochastic action going on here. So after we take an action, we might purchase these parcels. There's a high entropy in terms of the next states that you might end up in, because the bird, if there are many birds, they can fly to many different places, all with non-negligible probabilities. So stochastic branching causes problems to many types of planners as well. So basically, I thought about the different off-the-shelf planners, and either the language that you express the problem in just doesn't handle our problem, you can't express our problem, or they're just not going to scale. So Monte Carlo style planners just won't scale unless you do lots of hackery on the outside of them. So what are we going to do? We're going to, in this paper, we decided to consider an approach that is sometimes called hindsight optimization. It goes by other names, anticipatory planning, sometimes in the operations research literature. And the general idea here is going to be to essentially try to compute an upper bound on the values of actions by solving multiple deterministic problems. So we're going to determinize the problem in multiple ways, and we'll talk about what that means, and solve deterministic problems. And by doing that, we're hoping to deal with a stochastic branching factor. One way to view this is a heuristic reduction from probabilistic to deterministic planning. And while you can come up with many counterexamples for this approach failing, it often works very well in a lot of different applications. I've had pretty good luck with it in many cases. But the prior approaches have typically, maybe always, studied small action spaces. The way that the algorithm is implemented really can only work for small action spaces. So really the main contribution here is trying to show how you can do hindsight optimization for very large action spaces. So I need to tell you what hindsight optimization is, and to do that, I need to introduce the notion of a future and determinization. So a future, we're just going to use that as a formal term for describing the coin flips that occur during a stochastic evolution of some process. So as a stochastic process evolves, it's flipping coins, and we're just going to flip coins beforehand, and we're going to call that the future. And once we fix the future, all the coin flips, we have a deterministic evolution relative to that future. Okay? And what that looks like for our problems, what I'm doing here is showing sort of a DBN-ish type representation. So at time 0, we have 3 parcels, and they can either be populated or not. And this is showing what the budget is at each time step. And so a future will tell us what the budget is. So we know what the budget is. It's stochastic, but if I give you a future, you know what it is. And also these arcs represent if a bird is here at a certain time, at time 1, and we own W at time 1, then there will be a migration from U to W. Okay? And likewise, there will not be a migration from U to V in this case, even if we own V. So it's telling us deterministically where the birds are going to travel. Okay? And there's you can generate many of these basically get as many as you want. So what do we do with a future? Well, here's an example future, and suppose that we have an initial state where this U is occupied. So we're indicating that by red. And suppose that we have a policy where we're going to purchase U at time 0 and purchase these 2 at time 1. Given a policy and the initial occupation and a future, we can very easily sort of track the spread of the birds relative to that future. Okay? And at the horizon, we see that we have 2 parcels occupied, so we get a reward of 2, we'll say. And so I'm just going to denote that reward. S is the initial state, F is the future, pi is the policy that we're purchasing with. We're going to denote the reward via that problem. And the deterministic optimization problem that we're interested in is this argmax. We want to find the best policy for a particular future. Okay? Our hindsight optimization approach is going to use that as the deterministic optimization problem. And it turns out that this is only NP hard. In AI, we can say that. And so we can code it up as a mixed integer program. And actually, this can be solved with practical efficiency for pretty large maps. We've done that, and we've seen that. So we want to sort of use that as our little subroutine to solve the larger problem. All right, so now we can get to what HOP, or hindsight optimization, is really going to do. So normally, if we were solving the problem optimally, we'd be interested in computing this optimal value function, which is really just finding the best policy for an expectation that has the best expected reward. That's what this is saying. And generally, this is hard to do, right? This is solving a really large MDP. What hindsight optimization does is it instead focuses on an upper bound, the hindsight value function, by interchanging the maximization and expectation. And so this isn't sound, but it gives you an upper bound on the optimal value, obviously. And the thing it does is now we have this nice little deterministic problem inside the expectation, and we know we can approximate expectations nicely by sampling. So what we're going to be doing to get value estimates is sampling futures and then solving these deterministic planning problems and averaging. So the more futures you sample, the closer you'll get to the hindsight value. And if the hindsight value is good for guiding your problem, you're going to be in good shape. So how do people typically use this value estimator to make decisions with hindsight optimization? Well, if I'm in an initial state, what they'll typically do is estimate the hindsight value of every action. And how they do that is for every action, they'll explicitly generate next states, and then generate futures from those next states, and solve the deterministic problems, and you can get a hindsight value estimate for every action. You take the action that has the highest value. The problem is that this explicit approach obviously scales with the number of actions, right? You're going to have to solve at least as many deterministic problems as the number of actions. In our case, that's just not practical. We've got at least 2,500 squared actions. So we needed to do something else in this work. And the way that we do that is instead of trying to estimate the value of every action directly, explicitly, we're going to try to create a mixed integer program that directly tries to compute the maximum action, the action with maximum hindsight value. And so it's going to implicitly encode the value of every action, and we're hoping that we won't have to, the runtime, the solver will be able to figure out the structure of the problem. And so what that looks like is the following. So we're going to maximize over policies of the reward that we get for sampled futures, with the constraint that the first action of every policy is the same. And so this picture sort of tells you, is a good reflection of what we're doing. So we have our initial state, we have our futures, and what we want to do is make sure that this first action is the same, and optimize the value, the reward in these futures otherwise, okay? And that avoids the explicit enumeration over actions. The solver is going to have to find structure if it wants to avoid that itself. So now this MIP is scaling with the number of futures, and that can become impractical if you want to have 20 futures. But you can see there's some nice decomposition potential here. These futures are completely independent subproblems except for the constraint on that initial action. And so for those of you who do this sort of thing for a living, it immediately suggests that you do something like Lagrangian decomposition on the problem. You can turn the crank. So once we get rid of the constraint on this first action, they become completely independent, and we can solve them independently. I'm not going to go, basically it's textbook material from there. You can look at the details in the paper. But the algorithm that results, I'll show you, I'll basically just summarize that. So what happens is we're going to generate our futures, and then we're going to iterate. This is an iterative algorithm. We're going to solve each of these futures independently, And if they all happen to agree on the first action, we're happy, we're done, we've got our action and we output it. If they don't agree, then you do your Lagrangian update. You update the dual. And effectively what that's going to do is adjust the costs of the parcels at the first time step in a way that makes the next iteration want the actions to agree more. And then you'll solve with those adjusted problems, and eventually it will converge, or you do the standard thing and you have a heuristic extraction approach for the action. So that's what the algorithm does. And the nice thing is these are all, if you have parallel facilities, you can basically solve these problems independently. The only coupling is when you update the costs at each step. So how does this do? Well, here's just a picture of the runtime. So you can compare for different numbers of futures. So this is for 25 futures, for example. Running Cplex on the full MIP versus doing the dual decomposition. And you get some savings here. But the big deal is when you want to run for a lot of futures, the solvers just can't, they run out of memory. And whereas the dual decomposition can still cope. It doesn't, it's going to take longer, but it's not going to run out of memory. And on a multi-core implementation, it would be even faster because you could potentially get linear speed up, but it's not going to be linear. It's going to be related to the maximum time it takes to solve an individual instance. So we're comparing to some prior work. This is the main prior work that I talked about, the myopic approach. So this approach does not consider the future actions. It does consider the future diffusion when it's doing its adaptive solutions. This greedy zero is something that doesn't even consider the future population spread. And our approach considers both. These are just synthetic maps that we created where if we don't work on these, then we're not going to work on anything. So there's a lot of free parcels, and you need to be non-myopic if you're going to notice that this is the initial population here. If you're going to notice that you should buy these parcels rather than do the greedy thing and buy these. Basically our approach, it does better here as we would hope. And on the real map, the paper has some other examples, but this is just one. We have initial populations here. HOP, our Hindsight Optimization, is doing better. And we can see roughly why it's doing better if we sort of plot out its performance. So this is just showing the purchases that are made by Hindsight Optimization. And what we see is that Hindsight is eventually seeing that it should be trying to reach these free areas over here, as opposed to being misled by some greedy decisions elsewhere. And it does reach these decisions. It does purchase parcels in that direction, and we do get spread out to those free regions. And if we compare that to the prior approach, the more myopic approach, it does not sort of recognize the value of those regions, and you don't get any birds over there. And same for the greedy zero. So that's just one example of how being a little less myopic does actually help in this domain. So just to summarize, just to talk about some future work, so we're trying to extend this idea to more general domains, and to do that, we're implementing this approach for a generic planning language called RDDL, which is used for some planning competitions. Basically, it's a language for describing complicated Bayesian networks, dynamic Bayes nets. I'm also interested in understanding some additional conditions under where Hindsight Optimization can have performance guarantees. There are a few conditions that are known, but it's pretty easy to find counterexamples as well. And then, I'm also interested in extending this dual decomposition. So don't just stop with HOP. You can continue running the algorithm in certain ways and try to gradually move from Hindsight Optimization solutions to more optimal solutions. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have time for maybe one or two questions, perhaps. So here you assume that the diffusion model is known.
Yeah, there's a known model that was, this is from the biologists.
So
Yeah,
I'm just wondering if how sensitive it is to changes in the variables of the diffusion model, right? I mean, there are many diffusion models, right?
it should be sensitive. We haven't analyzed how sensitive it is. The model was basically given to us by biologists. They did some fitting. So it would be sensitive. How sensitive, I don't know. Yeah.
Any more? Oh, yes. So I think you were looking at basically discrete. There's either there's a population in a parcel or not. Sorry, I'm here. I was wondering if you think there would be you might get something from relaxing it to a continuous problem where so then instead of discrete transition probabilities, there's continuous, and then it seems like it would then turn into a big matrix problem.
Yeah. So I didn't fully
Maybe it's not
describe
applicable.
the full details of the model. Each parcel actually has many sites, and it's counting sort of, it's not a binary value. Yeah, so if you look at the paper, there's more details there.
Okay, so it's much messier. Thanks.
Okay, in the interest of time, let's thank the speaker again.